Before I start, I'd just like to ask amongst the crowd over here, how many of you people experienced the gull-wing Stinsons flying into Maylands? Anybody here today? There's one out the back there. Not too many. 2, 3, no? 4, beauty. So we've got a few people here that remember them landing at Maylands. I unfortunately didn't experience that. You're right. I was actually, but just didn't. But this Stinson came to Australia, was brought to Australia by the Vacuum Oil Company in 1936, and was used by their executive people to fly around the country inspecting their fuel installations, and it flew into Maylands later that same year. During the war, another Stinson used to fly in and out of Maylands, Uniform Tango Whiskey, and I was talking to someone earlier that actually George Aylmore had a ride in the right-hand seat of Uniform Tango Whiskey down at Noangra, George? Yeah. So, but that aircraft used to fly in and out a few times. It unfortunately got blown to bits by the Japs during the war. This machine is the only remaining SR-8C in Australia. During the war it was impressed into service as A38 number 1, and it was number 1 because it was only 1. After the war it was sold back to private hands and went to a fellow called K. Findlay in Launceston in Tasmania. He flew it through the 50s. In the 60s, in 1960, a guy called Mott from Sydney purchased it and changed the registration to Charlie Whiskey Mike. And that registration stayed with the aircraft right through until we acquired it and finished the registration in 2006. In 1967, it went back to Tassie to a man called Gull. And then in 1970, a fellow called Don Sullivan from West Perth purchased it. Some of you may know Don. And he commissioned Ron Tutt to go to Launceston and fly it home across Bass Strait and bring it here to Jandakot. And it lived here in the hangar for some 6 years. Ron, to stand up just so that we can all see who these guys are. Sorry guys. Don's the man that owned it and Ron's the man that flew it. I can remember coming in, I was restoring my Tiger at the time in 77. I used to come into the hangar every day to work on my Tiger and see this thing in the corner, and I used to open the door and dribble and carry on. Not that I ever dreamt that I was ever going to own it one day, of course. Don, now we have a video which we are hoping to play you of the restoration that was undertaken here at the Aero Club. Well, let's try and play the video.
I'm quite sure we've lost count.
Pretty well done in preparation?
No, there's been a lot of problems of delays, so it hasn't been that long actual restoration, but about 2 years or so.
Now you've tried to fly the aircraft before, during that period, and you've had a few setbacks.
Yes, we've done taxiing tests, high-speed taxiing tests prior to takeoff, and we had brake failure 3 times out of the 3 times that we did it, and which...
Doesn't that inject a certain air of uncertainty into today's flight?
Hard to say, really. Let's say that we're hoping everything's going to go all right.
You're very casual about the whole thing, so apart from being slightly dramatic and slightly uncertain, it's also a historic flight, this one, isn't it?
Check out the club in the
yes,
background.
I suppose you could term it historic because the fact is that we haven't flown it for 4 years, 1, and 2, that it's just about the oldest aeroplane in Australia. It was, we first registered in Australia in 1936, and as far as we know, we haven't checked too thoroughly, we're trying to, it's the only Stinson Reliant of this model left in the world. There's quite a lot of the other models, the later models, but this one is the very early one.
That would make it an extraordinarily rare and valuable aircraft.
My word, I don't want to pull it upside down.
test by our intrepid test pilot. One circuit over Perth makes some sort of aviation history. But there's that immutable law about going up and coming down.
We need to thank Ron Tutt for allowing us to use that video. He only sent it to me a matter of a few days ago, and we really appreciate that, Ron, because it's part of the history of that aeroplane. And Don, of course, as the owner. Thank you very much.
It's the first time I've seen it too.
Is it really? Oh, big bloke. Okay, well, on to later years. Prior to 2003, as was mentioned earlier, I had restored a tiger moth and a chipmunk. And I was starting to get the urge to do another project. And my family said to me, we're not having another aeroplane unless we can all go in it. Because my wife used to have to stay behind while Sarah and I used to go flying. So happened I was reading a Classic Wings magazine and I saw Charlie Whiskey Mike for sale. It had left here. Ron flew it across to a guy called Joe Drage at Albury-Wodonga in New South Wales in '76. And Joe kept it. He had 20 collected aeroplanes of all types, stagger wings, the whole bit. And in 1980, he donated them to the Wangaratta Air World Museum. And she lived in the Wangaratta Museum for the next 20 odd years. Unfortunately, early 2000s, the museum came under hard times and they had to end up selling 50 aircraft of all types. Very sad story. And Charlie Whiskey Mike was one of them. So I said, I know this machine, what do you think? And Vicky said, So a period of negotiation took place and we managed to secure the deal in about April 2003. They wanted us to fly it home, but we chose to, mindful of the condition of some of the fabric, we chose to trailer it home. Made a few phone calls to the museum to get some critical dimensions, hired a 20-foot long triple axle trailer, made some jigs so that we could successfully put the aeroplane onto the trailer, and headed east. 4:30 on a Saturday morning, Dad, myself and a mate of mine, Mark Hampton, jumped into Dad's four-wheel drive and off we went across the Nully. I'll keep this moving fairly well because there's a fair bit to cover. Now, he didn't sleep like that all the way. He did do more than his fair share of driving, I must say, but we took it in turns to have a bit of a snooze. If there are questions you want to ask as we go along, please do so, because we can relate to the slide that may be up at the time. But I will keep moving as fast as possible unless you want to ask a question. Okay, it's Monday morning. We drove all weekend, got there Monday morning, 7 a.m, and this was the museum, a magnificent building, nearly 100 metres long, 40 odd metres wide, and there were a few aeroplanes left, ours being one of them, and as you can see, the tail was not really in the right condition to be flown home. A Wacket, a VH-18, is that a Rapide?
Yep.
Yep. A few of the planes left, and we started immediately pulling the wings off our machine. Bit of a hair-raising period. We actually picked the fuselage up with a forked lift to get it on the trailer, and the undercarriage was a little bit too wide, so I had to put a universal beam across the front so the wheels could sit outboard of the trailer. Dwarfed the Nissan, and by Wednesday lunchtime we were loaded and ready to roll. 2.5 days. The jigs worked beautifully. The tail was held at the back so that we could. I think I'm supposed to use this, aren't I? Yeah, there's a little jig there that holds the tail in the air, and the two main planes are held independently on the basis we made, and everything else was tucked in with lots of foam and straps and so on. We drove non-stop again across Victoria, South Australia, departing Ceduna just after sunset, heading west. The local constabulary got us for driving after sunset, and up in South Australia, once a light wide load goes past sunset, you've got to stop. So $155 poorer, they insisted we camp, and that we did on another cold as the horse. Made it home about 1 o'clock on the Sunday afternoon, 9 days after leaving. The plane travelled beautifully. Nothing moved, nothing was damaged other than some fabric letting go, which we sort of expected. Unloading, we got 2 tractors, put the main wheels in the buckets, lifted it, had a mate of mine holding the tail in the air to keep it balanced, drove the trailer away, and she breached terra firma. Christmas Day 2003, we started the restoration, and we just moved into it fairly gently, sort of feeling our way to find out what we really had ahead of us. And man, did we find out. She was pretty tired. Fabric clearly gone. And it became very obvious there was only one way to attack this whole thing, and that was to strip it down completely and start again. The interior had done a fair bit of work and was starting to fall apart. That was actually put in, I think, in the 70s, wasn't it, guys? Yeah. So nothing for it, family into it, and it all started to come to bits. My good wife, hard at work. Fabric, fantastic to fly on that all the way from Wangaratta to Perth, not a problem. Shows how old the fabric was. How long ago did we have 87 octane fuel? Behind the scenes, pretty tired. Everything was pretty tired. Now, another problem we had was I couldn't find any manuals anywhere relevant to this machine. I searched the world, sought the Stinson pub in America, far and wide, couldn't find a manual. So we resorted to the beautiful thing called the digital camera and filmed every component as it came off from different angles so that we saw how it sat, its dimensions, etc., etc. And that was our manual, basically, the digital camera. That's the front section of the fuselage, frightening. Engine very tired, rubbers were like concrete, wires falling off, really not a pretty sight. Undercarriage area, these are the main shock absorbers with coil springs. We stripped it down to the last nut and bolt, nothing left. My wife referred to it as a TV antenna on its side. Chose to be-blast it so that we could inspect it for cracking. We x-rayed all the key points, the wing attach points, undercarriage sections. Wherever we felt there was any excess stress was x-rayed. The only cracks we found were on the engine mounts. Oh, here we go. That's the inside our shed. This all happened down at Mother John, by the way. Rigged up tarps and blasted the entire thing there back to bare metal. The only cracks we found were just on the engine mounts, just where that bar is pointing. Those things that had an engine swing on them for 70 years, they were only minor cracks, but obviously now is the time to fix them. And Gavin from Jandakot Welding came down and did all the necessary repairs before we moved forward. Now that is not a grey nurse shark painted red. That is a wheel spat, believe it or not. The wheel spats had 70 years supply of placky paint upon paint upon paint. Each spat weighed nearly 15 kilos. And something about that shot, I don't know what it is, but we stripped them back to base metal. And there's my dad. He used to come up each week and work away with us, which was great. The fuselage, being metal framed, is then supported by superstructure of wood to give it the lines that it has. And the top section, which is this bit, was in very good condition, required very little repair. But the belly was something else. She was oil-soaked, water-soaked, rotten. And we manufactured all new wood, and if anyone's interested, I've actually bought some of the runners that we manufactured. All these little stringers, you know, the 20-foot long, not 20, 15-foot long, manufactured them out of ash, and we also use red cedar wood for the rest of the woodwork, which you'll see in a minute. But if anyone wants to have a look at that, you're welcome to pass it around. Just look there for design. This is actually one of the doors lying on its side, and the bottom is here. In that area there's actually a water drain hole, as you would expect, which had long blocked. And the entire bottom section of that woodwork was just absolutely rotten. So there was nothing for it but to replace it. And we manufactured new laminated wood, which fitted in to sound wood as required. And while we were there, of course, we worked on the rest of the door to make sure it was then serviceable. This aeroplane has wind-up windows. We replaced the perspex in the windows and made sure that the operation was all smooth, and it looks a treat. The rest of the woodwork, although it didn't look too bad, was in fact not acceptable. The joints, all the glue had broken away, the screws were loose. It was all pretty second-rate. So we used the original woodwork for patterns and manufactured all new timber components for the entire aircraft. That's all the woodwork from the top of the cockpit area. Firewall was something else. Tied, cracked, just yeah. Fairly complex firewall because the oil tank, which is this middle bit, is actually recessed into the firewall. Not a lot of space there. And the starter motor for the engine actually goes through that hole into the cockpit. And as you can see, there's another little bit of a recess there, just buying space for the engine. So nothing for it, we decided to build a new one. There's the old components, there's the recess, and there's the original firewall. Made a pattern, and got stainless steel and aluminium, and made two new components to create the new firewall. The engine mounts protrude through these four little points here, so they have to be located and cut correctly. Oh, just hark back. This is my mate Mark, who used to travel down from South Geraldton, being Ellenbrook, if you ever remember that suburb. Every Sunday morning he was there by 8, worked all day long with me all day Sunday, and usually left 6 or thereafter to go home, to go back to work on Monday morning. Wonderful bloke, and he's the guy that came with us on the drive across to pick it up in the first place. He's actually there working on one of the window surrounds. They are pressed aluminium, and I'll tell you more about those in a few minutes. So there's the finished firewall and the oil tank. The oil tank was flushed, of course, cleaned, bead blasted, pressure tested, and then brought back to an acceptable standard to fit the new firewall. And you can see some of the woodwork, little bits of woodwork all around the place from the views from the cockpit area. Our good friends Mac and Ed and the Light Body, I'm not sure if any of you know these people, but wonderful people. We've known them for more than 30 years, always supported us with our flying. We used to land in their paddock and they'd bring us tea and coffee back in the 70s. And they used to come around pretty regularly and check out the progress. Again, here's some more of the woodwork that we manufactured to replace the old stuff. There's my beautiful little daughter and my wife at the back there. We just fitted the tail feathers to make sure they go back into position and to work out how they went back into position. That girl now, in minutes, has grown to a 17-and-a-half-year-old beautiful young woman. Fabric starts to go on. We actually start to get some shape back. Progressing with tapes, starting to get a little bit of the original aircraft back. The skins from the doors forward are aluminium. The rest of the machine is all fabric. But the original skins, again, were just not good enough, so we decided to manufacture new skins, and there they are, just being plicated into position to make sure they fitted correctly. And despite being new, we, during manufacture, created a few slight dents, shall we say, not exactly dents, but imperfections, so we had to package them up and generally sweeten it up to make it acceptable. My brother-in-law, Vicky's brother, was over from Queensland working in the mines, and he had come home on weekends, and he chose to take on restoring the various fairings on the machine. Did a wonderful job with his high-tech equipment. He had a welding hammer, and we adapted the welding hammer to have a round peg in one end and a square peg in the other, and a dolly, and he weaved his magic on all of our fairings. Did a fantastic job. That's one of his fairings fitted back onto the new skins just to make sure it sat where it should. Does that mean you want me to finish?
No, holding the handicraft.
He did some beautiful work. Not sure why we've got, just the undercarriage legs. The undercarriage legs were blasted back to bare metal, X-ray, checked for cracks. We found some welding cracks but no fatigue cracks. They were repaired before priming and painting. All components were 2-pack primed, followed by 2-pack top coat to ensure we had no corrosion hereafter. There's some of the undercarriage components and some of the controls. There's the shock absorbers, now restored. Took them apart. Within that there's a typical shock absorber, oil filled. We had all the hard chrome, re-hard chrome and polished, new seals and reassembled as new condition. Very pleased with the way they came up. The fairings on the undercarriage, not good enough, so we made new ones, just being fitted in position there to make sure they sat as they should. And fills, spat and fairings followed thereafter. The fairing that put the leg to the spat was, again, pretty chatty. Phil spent a lot of time. In fact, I had to stop him because he just wouldn't give up. He was a real perfectionist. Don't like those people. And we moved on to the cockpit area. The instrument panel was fairly bland in its original layout. The amazing thing is the radio, whoops, sorry, didn't want to do that. The radio was way over here on the right-hand side when the pilot was way over there on the left-hand side, and it's not a bad-sized cockpit, so fairly impractical. All the rest of the instruments were operational. The gas primer in the middle here clearly leaked, and there was an instrument in past years in that area, and we really have never found out what that was. So we stripped it all back to base metal and started to refit instruments to work out the layout we required. We in fact welded that hole up, and where the gas primer was, there was a few other holes we filled in, and we put 4 new instruments in, being a transponder, an intercom, a VHF radio, and a fuel flow meter. Chose 3-inch instruments so that they fitted in with the overall decor, shall we say, of the instrument panel. The steering wheels were just plain wood with aluminium spokes, which we polished. And there's one other thing I want to talk about there. The insert, this piece in the middle here, is actually thin aluminium, and that's the floating panel that takes all the shock absorbing for the sensitive instruments. We found a fantastic fellow, a friend of Mark's actually, a guy called David Duncan, who specialised in hand painting custom parts for cars and did some wonderful work. And he turned that insert and the window and windscreen surrounds into walnut wood grain finish. And we ended up with an instrument panel like that. We chose to cover the panel in leather, which we felt sort of fitted with the times and highlighted the instruments, and the wood grain dash really set it off, of course. An amazing man was Duncan. We found a fellow called Brad Richardson, who specialised in doing upholstery for custom cars. Young bloke, lived down in Baldivis, very industrious sort of a fellow. We sat down and talked about what we wanted and how we wanted the layout to be. He weaved his magic. We bought 2 cow hides and suede leather, and he converted the interior of the cockpit to what it is today. We also chose to complement the control wheels with leather, and we felt that the leather helped to set it off, of course. So the interior, as I said, was tired. Around the fuel gauge up here on the side of the cockpit, shall we say less than acceptable, that was his finished article. I think he did a sterling job. A number of the panels were replaced, as I've already said. This little panel fits below and behind the tail wheel, and being a tail wheel aeroplane, they get pretty punished with rocks and so on from rough strips, so made a new panel for that. And then we moved on to the wings. Amazing structures. This whole aeroplane is steel structure, not aluminium, steel. The wing has this incredible sawtooth truss that runs the length of the wing. It actually runs from the two wing attach points here and grows to being 400 mils deep there and then tapers off to nothing at the end. All steel and all built with oxy-torches, hand welded with oxy-torches. You should have seen the joints, just spectacular craftsmanship. Wings were in pretty good nick, needed a few little bits and pieces done to them. We checked all the structural points for integrity, found no problems, did a few minor repairs, blasted them, primed them, and started to cover. The other wing clearly was already, at that stage, was already covered. Getting ready to do getting ready to do stitching. And the joy of doing the covering was that after all the months of work on this skeleton, you start to get some beauty back into the thing. It starts to come back to show some of the grace of the lines of the aircraft. My good mate Clark Reese flew down for a weekend and helped us do some stitching. Massive task doing the stitching. Each wing took 60 man-hours to stitch. And the section from the corner here up to the fuel cap there and back down to the back is where the fuel tank sits inside. All those ribs had to be blind stitched because the needle couldn't go through. And that alone was a very, very long, arduous task. So we had a finished wing. Stitching finished, tapes going on, getting more and more like a real aeroplane. Amazing what a bit of dope does, really shows up the lines. And my good friend Peter Turner, painter extraordinaire from Aeropaint here at Jandakot, came down and laid the cream and burgundy colours on for us. Did a fantastic job. All this was done inside our shed at home, by the way. The tail feathers, steel framed, remember, being covered. Second side, getting ready for stitching. Tail plane, same thing. And but the Tiger and the Chippy, we did all our stitching in the lounge room, of course, as you do. Far more comfortable. Vicky used to lie on the carpet, read a book and poke the needle back to me as I needed. We couldn't get the wings of the Stinson in, they're too big. So we were stuck out in the shed with those, but all the tail feathers came inside. Finished tail, just fit it together to make sure it's as it should be. And we're on to the engine. Same problem, pretty second rate. The engine was half-life. The core of the engine, perfectly okay. We used borescopes to go inside the cylinders to check them out for corrosion and so on. Found none, in very good condition. But the rubbers were like concrete, rock solid, gaskets gone hard. The heat shield, which is at the back of the engine, this bit here, was all battered and cracked and had various mods done to it over the years. Far from acceptable. As you can see. Whoops, finally did it and went too far. So there's the heat shield, cleaned up, repaired, and fitted back onto the engine as we reassembled it with all new gaskets, seals, O-rings, everything we could fit new was replaced. We overhauled the carburetor, starter motor, generator. The only thing that wasn't overhauled was the base engine itself. Now, for the last few months of the restoration, I had been leaving the cowl till last because the engine cowl was an absolute disaster. And I really didn't have a clue how we were going to fix it. I had the idea that I was going to cut out the various parts that you can look at, which was the original bit, and replace them with new bits of aluminium. But I realised that 70-year-old brittle aluminium was not going to weld well to new aluminium. And the more we looked, the more we realised it was just not going to be. The edge of the cowl was rolled wire edges, and the rolled wire certainly didn't do enough to stop the vibration. And all the way around the perimeter of the cowl were these massive cracks. So we chose to build a new one. Now, a few things just to watch for here. This is the original air pickup, and there was another one on the other side the same. And at some stage, I don't know when, they removed the original pickup and put this big Baron type pickup on the bottom. didn't really match the aeroplane, obviously shouldn't have been there, and so that had to go. There it is being removed. Sorry?
I like the safety boots.
Yeah. We took a mould off the best part of the original cowl we could find of the blisters. The blisters are in fact handed. There's a left hand and a right hand repeated 9 times around the machine. And so we chose a pair and made it into a beating block. There's a fiberglass beating block obviously, and we glassed timber to the bottom so we could fill it up with compacted sand. And we bought 2 sheets of 0 grade aluminium and started hammering. Never done it before, so it was a pretty steep learning curve, and started to produce pieces like that. As we progressed, the technique got better. By the way, Phil, my brother-in-law, played a very big part in this. We worked alongside each other for the whole project of the Cowl. We finally had more than enough of these things, and we chose the best 9. Sorry. Built a pattern, because it was imperative that this new thing had to fit the aeroplane, of course. Fitted the old cowl to it just to make sure that it was as it should be. And started standing these bits up against it. Just screwed them on temporarily, of course, till we made it all start to come together. Slowly but surely. Lots of trial fits. Until finally we got pretty close to having a full ring of aluminium, all just held together with cliquets at this stage. Once we were satisfied with it, we took it up to Gavin at Jandakot Welding. We did a superb job welding it up. And no sooner did we get a ring of blisters that we had to start cutting holes in it again, because we had to do the air pickups. And the stress was pretty high. You imagine spending all those hours building that and then having to cut a hole. How do you do it right? So that we did. You can see the hole. We're just testing here. The carburettor is just down through there, and we're testing there to make sure that the hole's in the right place. Measure twice, cut once. And I'll put that slide there just to show you. There's the line of where the original pickup used to be. And so that helped us locate the position. We rolled tubes, spotted them into position, and then manufactured curves to blend the back into the cowl, until we had 2 pickups, amazingly, in the right place. The edge was, as I said, rolled wire, and we were not satisfied with that, so we chose to have commercially 10mm OD aluminium tube rolled into a perfect circle, and then we hand rolled that into the cowl, front and back, to strengthen the whole thing. And you can see there where we've built the back end of the blister. All still pretty raw at this stage. There's the aluminium rings I was talking about, and they were rolled in to strengthen it. Phil and I are there fitting the clamps that I used to hold it in position once on the engine. And it was so rigid, it was in fact far more rigid than the original, such that we ended up having to cut it in half. The original one opened up in one place only, and they used to spring it and slip it over the propeller onto the aeroplane and then clamp it shut. But because it was so stiff, we couldn't do that, hence 2 halves. And you could see back there we had undercoated it, and then we'd rub back to get rid of the high spots and the imperfections. The cowl has no filler as such, no placky as such on it. We did use high build putty, and on the weld lines we used, what do you call it, not spray putty, it's sort of it's a hand putty, but it's not placky, just to fill in the imperfections. You can see the imperfection on the weld lines through here in particular. We obviously have to get rid of those. There you can see the pink, that's the weld lines. Until finally, whenever we were at Gavin's, the welder, he would stand back and say, a thing of beauty. And that sort of little saying is stuck with us now. That is the bottom of the cowl. We in fact had to modify the two, whoop, get it wrong again. Come back over here. We had to modify the belly because The carburettor was fouling the weld line here between the blister and the pickup tube. And so hence we had to get rid of that line in that area to buy space for the carby, which we successfully achieved. More undercoat and onto the cream. We chose to machine up aluminium streamlined leading edges for the two air pickups, and I think you'll see them on this shot. Down the bottom there you can see we put leading edges just to tidy it up. And we also chose, we purposely chose to make the aeroplane back to its original colour scheme. Amazingly, after much debate in the family, we decided to go with cream and burgundy because we felt they were sort of period colours. Only after we had painted the machine, we found out that in fact it was originally painted cream and red, but just what red we're not sure. So we're pretty lucky to get close to its original colour. We did divert from its original colour scheme because the red used to run around the leading edge of the cowl and then streak back down the side to pick up the stripes of the aeroplane. But the blisters were so lovely we decided we needed to complement them with the burgundy paint, and we feel that really sets the cowl off nicely. These fairings here within a piece of cake compared with building the cowl. They are three-dimensional, not just a straight wraparound, so a few challenges, but they closed in the area between the heat shield and the firewall. This is a major painting day, clearly, bits hanging everywhere with wet paint on, some burgundy, some cream. The day came to hang the wings on. Fantastic milestone. We had 5 endless chains and pulled the tail of the plane up till it was level, and then 2 endless chains on each wing. We rigged up these jigs to carry them, took them up into the ceiling, matched them up to the airframe, and in one day she was all together. Then we had to put all the stripes on it. It took me 2.5 days, and I'm talking 15-hour days, to mask it up, ready to paint it. The entire machine had to be cocooned because we didn't want any overspray when we did the striping. The famous Stinson sign, we made a stencil up, and as part of that masking, the Stinson stencil was put onto the tail, onto the fin, and that was just a shot of us removing that stencil to leave the painted sign on the fin to original specs. So just a few stats. Retrieval, we went 7,632 kilometres over 9 days from Underjong to Wangaratta and return. 2.5 of those days were spent loading the machine up. Started our work on Christmas Day 2003, and it was ready to fly in July 2006. The overall job took a conservative 4,000 hours. They were really my hours, I guess. On top of that, we had Phil's time, Mark's time, the upholsterer, so certainly 4,000 hours. The cowl alone was 400 hours conservatively. My input was between 30 and 40 hours a week, and that went every week for 2.5 years. Major contributors, my wife of course, fantastic backing, stood by me the whole time. Started asking me what my name was, I have to tell you, towards the end, but she was there and did a fantastic job. Phil, my brother-in-law, Mark Hampton every Sunday, 8 to 6. Brad Richardson on the upholstery, Peter Turner on the base painting, David Duncan weaving his magic with the wood grain dash, Janicott welding, Gavin, the best. Our neighbours used to come across and help us lift things around because some of those bits were pretty big, and some of our good neighbours came across to help us reposition wings and so on. Friends and family, of course, Dad. Last but not least, Brian Davies, my engineer, stood by me and saw me through the whole project. I owe a great vote of thanks to Brian. So finally, we had our aeroplane ready to fly. I didn't know how to fly it. I had spoken to this gentleman over here who gave me his pearls of wisdom about how to fly it, and I also spoke to Joe Drage in Wodonga, the 2 men that I knew that had flown the machine. And so lots of thinking, as you can imagine, and I also did a fair bit of time taxiing up and down the runway, both at slow speed and a little bit of higher speed, getting the feel of the ground handling, which helped me tremendously. Finally, she flew, and this is actually a shot taken by Keith Lightbody of our first approach back into our farm over the power lines. There's something about that that really makes my spine tingle. Just coincidental, but you know, it just flew beautifully. And then we started to enjoy the machine. Our dream was to go for a family holiday, and we spent 42 days flying around Australia, the three of us. For those that would like to, that does anyone know what a blog spot is? I certainly did not. It's a diary on the internet. And if you want to take a note of that name there, down the bottom in blue, Vicky, every night of our trip, sat with a laptop and wrote the story. And she's attached photographs, and there's pictures all over Australia of our trip. And it's there for you to see anytime you want to check it out. 2008, we were at an old Fliers luncheon, and we took the Stinson for a bit of a squirt around here just so that people could see it fly, and Reg and Shirley came along, brave people that they were. It was only a brief fly, wasn't it, Shirley? But it was good.
Really?
Flew over to Tired at Avalon 2009, and my good friend Lynn Forster met up with us, and we spent a couple of hours reminiscing about our flying experiences in the past. Special day. Wally Nylon used to ride his push bike across Perth in the 1930s to check out the Stinsons flying at Maylands. And when he was selling his aeroplane, I thought he was crook, so I rang him, got the story, and he told me about his push bike riding, and he said, "I've never got to fly in a Stinson." I said, "Mate." So at Serpentine, 2009, at Wally and Betty for a fly. Very special day and very emotional for Wally. And I think he really loved it. We were very lucky. We flew to an event up at Caversham, a car event, and Sir Jack Brabham was there. He was actually the guy, the guest for the day. And we were lucky enough to spend about 10 minutes with him walking around the planes. He told us of his own trip when he flew his aeroplane from England to Australia, back in the 60s, I think it was. A lovely bloke and a special time. Coming home, Mr. Rear pulled up alongside us, and he had Greg Hill in the back. And I think that shot's pretty special of our city under the Stinson. How's Greg? Still in hospital. Special day again, this year. Warren Reynolds asked me if we would fly his bride into his wedding at the Belvoir Reception Centre in the Swan Valley, which of course we jumped at. And this beautiful girl climbed into the Stinson. We went out of Jandakot, landed on this beautiful grass strip in the middle of the Swan Valley, and that's our story, folks. Thank you very much.